Okay, so the idea here is to have a series of 3 talks, which are kind of going to look at these 3 separate books. The first is going to be The True and Faithful Relation with John Dee and Edward Kelly, and what happened with them. And then we're going to look at Liber 418 with Aleister Crowley and Victor Newberg and what kind of happened between them. Then we're going to look at the Book of Thoth, which is where Crowley tries to ratify all these things and explain all these things. Now, there's no way to look at one part without looking at the whole part, so yes, this is not just going to be a True and Faithful. We're not going to leave True and Faithful when I'm done this. It will be returned to, etc., etc. It's a lot of material to cover. And Dee wrote prolifically, and this is kind of, this is the first point. I want to make it absolutely clear why I'm making the connection between these things. I believe that it's reasonable to assume that the effect, or the cause, is prefigured in the effect. Liber 418 is arguably the most intense use of the Enochian system that is on record. Maybe there's something out there that someone has done that's more interesting, or created more stuff, or produced more interesting material, but if it's out there, it's not published, it's not written, I haven't seen it anyway. So this is, for the time being, what happened between Dee and Kelly. We don't really know what they came up with the Enochian system. We don't have a record of that as much, which is reasonable, as people know. But the history of Dee and Kelly, a lot of their records were destroyed. We don't have a complete picture of what happened between them. We don't have their complete diaries. We don't have all the information. We have a picture. We have a little picture, which happens in True and Faithful and the 5 Books of Mystery. And that's what we're essentially trying to work with here. And if it is the case, see, the Enochian system, which Dee and Kelly came up with, which is recorded in True and Faithful Relation, later gave rise to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and also orders in Paris that we know a lot less about, because after the Nazi occupation of France, occult orders in France were essentially destroyed, and their records were destroyed. The record of what they did or how they might have used this system is gone. So it's a big question mark there. But Alethus Levy got his hands on this, and later that, through him, got transmitted to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in England. And we have their record because they won the fucking war, basically. Although there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the occultists in England were not as impressive as the occultists in France at the time. That's an opinion. We can dispute that. At the same time, it's one of the things where we only have part of the picture, so we're trying to reconstruct from an imperfect record exactly what happened and how this information came down. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, essentially its outer college was aimed at trading someone or getting them ready to use the Enochian material, and their basic rituals were key to getting someone to understand essentially what was going to come later, the divisions in the Enochian material. So if the reason that things get divided into 4 elements have to do with the 4 watchtowers. It has to do a lot too with ancient Greek ideas. They had the 4 elements. This is where the idea has its genesis. But in a very practical sense, how it gets used in ceremonial magic has more to do with the Enochian system than it has to do with, Heraclitus or something like that. This was preliminary training as far as they saw. They thought that you needed to have the ritual foundation before you could work with this system, which is fine. To explain why it evolves into the Book of Thoth, the tarot is very important, not just to what was important to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It's also very important to Thelema. Aiwass, at one point, when he describes in the Book of the Law, he talks about the tarot. He calls it my book. The letters of my book are right. So literally, and that's not the only place in the book, but at different times there are references to the tarot made. So the tarot is like a medium of communication between the spirits and Crowley at a particular time, and they basically explain that, yes, this is the language that we're going to be speaking to you in. So that's why it's significant that when Crowley came up with the Book of Thoth at the end, it was one of the last books that he wrote, one of his final attempts to put everything together and put it all into the same system. He decided to use the tarot as his final alphabet to ratify that system, to put everything together. And it all starts in True and Faithful Relation. There's a few issues that we should look at. When I originally got the idea to do this, it was largely because of something Angela, who's unfortunately not here tonight, said in, I think, during the Book of the Law lecture, which was when she was talking about the changing of the aeon and what it exactly meant for the aeon to change. And this is very significant, because if you look at true and faithful relation, the morality of the angels, and this is the big thing for Crowley and for Thelema. Thelema isn't just a new magical system, it's not just a new mystical system, it is a new way of thinking about morality. It's a new way of understanding good and evil and what those concepts actually mean, and what we should be attracted to, what should we be repulsed by, stuff like that. In true and faithful relation, the angels are all over the place. They're constantly contradicting themselves, contradicting each other. The information they get is that Kelly and Dee get is sketchy. It's very inherently contradictory. Sometimes you hear stuff from the angels that really seems to prefigure what Crowley's saying later in the Book of the Law. And there are other times that they're reinforcing very strongly a traditional Christian morality and really hammering that in. I mean, especially with Kelly, they tell him constantly, you have to be humble, you have to, lose your pride, stop doing this for yourself, whereas Crowley tells us later that humility is disencountenanced by the Book of the Law. Like, Thelema is definitely not about humility, it's not about being humble, it's about being proud and raising yourself up, etc., etc. So this is an interesting question, and I think that what it opens up is the reality of dealing with spirits in any case. There's never going to be a consistent thing, because you know what? You're not always right. You're not always tuned into the right channel. You're not always getting the information that you should be getting. And if someone does ceremonial magic on a regular basis, they will find that the information they get contradicts it, because it's really hard to tell when you're in the right and in the wrong. And this is the elephant in the room that people don't want to admit with ceremonial magic, because for most people, they don't do it, or if they do it so rarely that when they actually do it, they would hate to admit that the information they got perhaps might not be accurate, and so on and so forth. But this is a constant thing through Dee and Kelly, and this is one of the things that comes up in terms of validating Crowley's own experiences, because Crowley did claim that in previous incarnations he actually was Eliphas Levi. He actually was Edward Kelly. And people who write about it, Israel Regardie's biography, I think he's very dismissive of this idea. Other people who talk about Crowley, they're very dismissive of this idea. They're kind of like, oh, well, whatever, it's just something he said. But I mean, Crowley's not basing this on anything other than looking at their work and seeing the similarities between their work and his work. He's not claiming to have these astral past life experiences or whatever. He's actually just saying, I've seen what these people produced, and I believe I actually was the person who produced that, essentially. And it's really apparent. If you're very familiar with Crowley and you read True and Faithful and you look at what Kelly says, there are a lot of similarities. Kelly is constantly berating the angels, and the angels are constantly berating Kelly. Like, there's this huge hostile relationship between the two of them, well, to Kelly and them, essentially, which gets dismissed because, of course, the traditional way to dismiss John Dee and his work is to say that Kelly was swindling him, which is, on the face of it, ridiculous. If you know anything about the relationship between Dee and Kelly, Kelly didn't really want to be there. He was essentially being forced to be there through most of the period. So the whole concept of him trying to trick Dee into something, he had nothing to gain. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose, essentially, from doing that. But at the same time, in